Today on the podcast, we have a bachelor's classmate of mine, Geoff Bekavac. Geoff, as soon as I met him, was very entrepreneurial, always super entrepreneurial in nature, also a good technical engineer. But he, after, his bachelor's degree, he went and started working. And actually, we had another person on the podcast earlier, Yanni, who had this story of him driving and handing out resumes. I know Geoff did the exact same thing to get his first job. And actually, I learned about this not through Geoff, but I have a friend who's a bit more senior than we are, maybe about like 10 years senior to us. And he told me there was this guy who showed up at his company and basically like handed and gave him a resume one day. And it turns out it was my friend Geoff. So I learned this story not through Geoff, but through like somebody who was also at this company. And Geoff did get that job. So interestingly enough. But yeah, so Geoff now is currently running his own company. I believe they have about 50 to 70 employees here in Edmonton. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the company's focused on e-commerce. And so Geoff has a lot of interesting perspectives because he didn't like exactly follow like a traditional path right out of school. Like he did work an engineering job, but only basically just like part-time to kind of like make a little bit of money and then like help him basically work on his side pursuits. And because I think he was always so passionate about his side pursuits, you knew this guy was going to like continue to do entrepreneurial things until he found something that really worked for him. And so, yeah, I love Geoff's episode. I hope you guys really enjoy it as well. Tyler, any thoughts on it?
I mean, yeah, it was just, you got to admire Geoff's drive for wanting to start a side project and then kind of pursuing that to the fullest extent. He was talking about how he was doing his 9-to-5 job, and then he was working in the evenings and in the mornings, and then it kind of took off after that. And the amount of personal risk that he had to drive into this project to his e-commerce company, to the point until it was successful, is pretty incredible. There's a guy that really like believes in the vision that he can, build this into a big company. He's got a really good team around him. He was saying that everybody's kind of the same. They're very driven as well. Mm-hmm. They have a good competitive nature amongst themselves too, and it makes for a good working atmosphere. So yeah, it was super unique. I've never heard this story before of an engineer just like building a huge e-commerce company. So it's pretty incredible, and he's got a lot of good advice. And yeah, we think you guys will get a lot out of it. So over to the episode.
Yeah, hope you guys enjoy.
Is just for myself and everybody listening, maybe you can kind of give us a high level overview of your journey, like since graduation, and your career path thus far, just to bring us all up to speed.
Yeah, sure. So yes, it is intentional. I've kind of tried to scrub a lot of my presence off of online. I feel like I was kind of stuck in a kind of like a tricky situation when I was migrating from my engineering role previously to this role, and I didn't really want to share a lot of what I was doing online. And since I've just kind of kept it that way, because I don't really mind it, I guess. But yeah, from graduation till now, it was a little bit of an interesting path. So actually, when I just graduated in 2017, I didn't have a job, but I had just gone to China twice. And I was like, this place is crazy. We met so many amazing people and connections that we still have today, that actually still are like pivotal to helping us do what we're doing still today. Just completely by luck, things that we just decide to, go to a show right before the flight leaves, and we met this one person who, owns this, and then this person owns this, and then just kind of like a domino effect. But on graduation, I was like, you know what, we're going to give this a shot. Let's kind of try to start our own thing. Actually launched like a artificial grass company called NextGen, which technically is still running. It's probably one of the, if you Google it in like Edmonton, it'll probably be the first one that comes up. So we did that for actually a few years, but we launched it that year. But then we got a place to start with Edmonton. And me and my current partner actually, and one other guy, we didn't really know what we wanted to do, but we were all kind of going in different directions of what to do. And then things kind of fell apart. I went and got an engineering job and did that for about 2 years in kind of industrial automation. And then my one partner went to New York, met a few people there, and then the other guy kind of just ended up falling off and doesn't really participate with what we're doing now. So a few years went past, and I was basically just working as an engineer. The last a few people who had left my company, it's like Dave knows too, ended up going to like Tesla and stuff, and I thought, oh, this is kind of cool. Maybe I'll do something similar. But to be honest, I didn't really like my job that much. Like I would say every Sunday, like I was getting the Sunday scaries, as people say, and I didn't want to go back, and wasn't having a fun time. I didn't really like my boss all that much, and I think it was more the fact that engineering's not really for me. And probably about 2 years in, my partner came back from New York, and he said, "Hey, I did this business for a few years down there. I think we can do something similar up here, but just do it way better." And started off by chiseling like evenings away to like go work on that, and then slowly chiseling more time away from my engineering role, like a few hours to do that, and then finally just completely ended up leaving the company and just went full into this. And that was probably when I jumped full into it was, I would say, about a year and a half ago now of kind of doing that. So we've been doing it for about a year and a half, just a little bit more than that. So yeah, and now we're doing what we're doing here. So
yeah. Actually, Geoff, I want to ask you a little bit, because obviously we went to, bachelor school together, and so I know you on a pretty decent level. And I know that you've always had kind of this like very entrepreneurial drive. Even when you were doing your engineering stuff, I know you were still like always thinking about side businesses and kind of like side hustles. For me, and maybe, the people listening, I'm kind of curious, like, what are some of the traits within yourself that you think have always made you like entrepreneurial and always tried to look down like non-traditional routes from what you're doing previously?
yeah, I would say that I would like to, I may be inquisitive, but also like ultra competitive too. I don't know if I come off that way, but I'm very competitive. And if I see someone doing something cool, I immediately am like, I have to do that better. And maybe a bit of an unhealthy trait, but I think it's also driven me to kind of do what I'm doing now. But also inquisitive about different areas. Like I find it really hard to be like, okay, I'm okay with just doing this one thing. There's so much to learn and so many areas that you can grow. And especially now, I don't think there's like a great excuse to not learn. It's so easy to learn kind of any skill you want. Just with time, but the accessibility is like anyone can get there. I kind of felt like I was kicking myself in the pants, in the butt, I should say, if I didn't do it. So definitely just probably I'd say relentless competitiveness a little bit, but then also just like a curiosity for the unknown, maybe probably the two.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So I kind of want to, I'm wondering like when, you're in your engineering job and you realize that, maybe it's not really for you, and you're kind of looking at this idea that you have on the side to pursue. How do you know like that when is the right moment for you to kind of go full in and pursue that 100%? And maybe because it could be the same thing even earlier, right? Like if you're in university and kind of like you're doing one thing, but you have like a curiosity you want to explore and kind of go down the rabbit hole in that direction. What do you think is like a good tipping point for someone to know that it's like, okay, I should be going and doing this thing? Or what was that instance for you kind of?
I would say that, if someone has like a side hustle, kind of what I would kind of recommend doing is, tracking it over a year maybe, and seeing kind of your gains in that, like maybe not only financially but also just like personally, and maybe number of followers or traction in general. And if it starts getting to the point where you're like, especially financially, you can probably leave and do almost as good, like 80% of what I'm doing now in terms of income, then I would say go for it, because you're in kind of control of your destiny at that point. In terms of when I had that switch, it was really hard for me because I think my entire family was really wanting me to go the engineering route. So the time to, I think the relationship I was in was also very kind of skeptical about this working out. And so it kind of like I had probably two different factors that were holding me from really kind of jumping into it. For me, what really happened was, one, it started taking way more time at this point, and it started getting to the like, I don't know what to do, to the fact that like I don't have enough time to do what I'm trying to do. So I just need more time. And the other one was just kind of seeing the growth, just the month over month growth, and especially around the Christmas months, Q4 is when it just blows up in terms of sales, and you're like, this is what we've been able to accomplish in a few months. I see where we're going in a year. It makes sense at that point to do that. I would say definitely having a strong team helps though too. Doing it by yourself is usually so much harder. And it can be done, but like motivation wise, it's so much harder too. Having the right team around you helps a lot, especially with reassurance too.
For sure. Geoff, actually speaking on kind of like the business side of things, so you were talking about sort of that pivot point of when you went from like the engineering job beforehand to then kind of going and working more on the business side. Beforehand, like what would your balance be with your time between say like your engineering job and like your basically what would have been like your side hustle at that point in time? And like, do you mind talking about like the rest of your team's like input at that point in time too? Because I know right off the bat when you guys were starting, like it wasn't just kind of like a single person working on it. Like you had I believe a few people working on that idea together.
Yeah, I mean my time balance was, I would say, probably like a 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 in my engineering role, so 9 hours, and then probably another 3 hours or so after on this. That slowly shifted. After a few months, it went to 4 hours, then went to 5 hours. I was coming in earlier to that role, and then leaving earlier. Got to the point where even that wasn't enough. That I was like, I had to ask to be able to like drastically even cut down my hours to just be able to make the time of what we're doing here. And then eventually got to the point where it was like that still doesn't even work. And like at that point, you're like, it's just time to cut it loose. And in terms of the other partners, they were in it, full time from the beginning, kind of going at it. And so, like I said, that's the thing with the team, just helping with reassurance, right? These other two people who are giving it everything they have for like, months at least, really assures you that this team is in it for the long run too. And they're gonna do everything they can to make it successful.
That's interesting because you said that you're with your business at least you're ultra competitive, and I'm just kind of curious within your own team you have a couple of partners there. Do you feel like there's maybe like a healthy competitiveness between you and your partners as well? If you see them working really hard, that you want to put in as much time and effort. I know just on a smaller level, I've experienced the same thing between me and Dave on this podcast. If he like does a bunch of work one week, I'm like, all right, I got to put in some work. I got to get some things done and stuff like that. So he keeps me, it's like working out with a partner, right? They keep you accountable. Like, do you feel like it's the same thing in your business?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I think there's almost like a bit of a sense of guilt probably if you leave earlier one day. Like I'd say like pretty much we're all in here around 9, like 9 a.m. in the day, but like we probably don't leave till like 8 or 9 too every day. So and for a really long time that was 7 days a week. I'd say now it's kind of cut down to 6, but even if it's me or not coming in on that 6th day, I just think there's a sense of guilt. And I think for all of us still, it's like even taking off like a day or going somewhere for a weekend, I think everyone here probably between us three has like a slight sense of guilt. But it's also probably a, what do I do at this point? Because you're used to doing that 24/7. You're like, now I've got some free time and you have no idea what to do with it because, yeah, you're used to working. So we definitely, I would say, keep each other accountable, but we're all hungry to get to the next level as well. So, but we also get along very well, and that's what's great about it too.
Yeah, I think, in regards to dynamics, no matter whatever you're doing, if you have really strong team dynamics, I think even if you are putting in a lot of hours and you're working hard, like you really want to go and you want to work for the guys that you're working with, or like whatever the team is at that point in time. The example I would give here, Geoff, was Geoff and I did our capstone project together in our bachelor's degrees. And we had a great team at that point in time. And I know a lot of us were putting in a lot of hours every day on the capstone project. But because we had such strong team dynamics, a lot of times it didn't really even seem like it was hard work because you just enjoyed doing the work and you enjoyed doing the work with the people you were doing. And in regards to that, Geoff, I actually want to ask, more on kind of the stuff that you're doing now. What have some of the skills and skill sets that you think have been important, basically going from, say, a traditional engineer, like your traditional job that you were doing beforehand, to now doing like more non-traditional work for, like the like skills that you were trained for as like a bachelor's student?
I Well, I think engineering probably teaches you really well about time management, and I think that's a skill that really can be applied anywhere. That's a skill that's really beneficial here. You know, one of the first things I do every day now is I come in and I have a daily planner, and I plan it down to the 30 minutes of what I'm doing for the day. I think about what I'm doing the night before, what I will be doing the day after, or the following day as well. And I think you just get to the point where you need to have an efficient time management ability to succeed. I would say another trait that was kind of, I would say, crossed over is traditionally, I feel like in engineering, when you're doing something, or at least in consulting, the job's not done until it's done. And so if people, if that takes you to being 8 p.m. at that office to get it done, or 9 p.m. or coming on the weekend to do it, it's kind of just the expectation, I think, in that area. And that's a trait that definitely crossed over here. But even more so, there, if something doesn't happen, company could get in trouble. You could get eventually in trouble, but here it's more, there's no one else to save you if you don't do it. It's kind of all on you. And so I would say those are the two traits from a technical standpoint. In the role I do, there hasn't been much crossover though.
Okay. And so it's curious for me because this isn't the first entrepreneurial thing you've tried, right? And so I'm kind of curious. The first times that you tried, what made you, after they didn't work out, just be like, okay, I guess it's not for me, I'll go back? Or what made you kind of try again? And then I'm wondering if you feel like you're the same person between that business and the one you're in now, or what changes had to happen in order for you to experience the success you're having with this one, in contrast to the first one that you tried.
Yeah, I would say there's this constant itch. I've always had this constant itch to just build something. I think that's the reason why you keep going back. You're like, maybe that didn't work out. There could be 100 reasons on why it didn't work out, but you lay it to rest, and like a week later, you have another idea, and you're like, I can make this happen. And the larger network that you know, the more people you know, you kind of start being like, oh, I can plug that person in there and plug that person in there, and it can probably work. Sometimes, obviously, it doesn't, but in this case, it did, which is really great, at least so far. What I would say that's really worked this time over the other times, and how I've kind of grown, is before, everything was pretty early stage in terms of what you're financially, but also your plans and just the planning in general, your traction. I felt like I was a lot before in kind of like the dreamer stage, where like I had practicality, but you're still seeing where it could go. And I think now it's been more just self-discipline to kind of get to where you're at now. It's the management of the size of the team that we have to we have a lot of moving parts every day, is understanding, moving fast, but also taking the time to properly go through every step, and know that almost trust the process, kind of getting there. But I would say that if you build your processes right, that eventually it's gonna get to the point that you want it to get to, and just being patient, probably.
Yeah. And Geoff, one thing I'm thinking about too, actually kind of going back on the side of the previous startups that you were working on. I know at least a couple, from the times that I've known you. I believe Tiafino is one, correct?
Yeah, that was one.
And then I know I can't remember the exact one you were working on when you originally went to China when we were in bachelor's school together, but it's all good. But actually, one thing I'm curious about, because I've also kind of been working on startup ideas, and I think one really strong skill that at least entrepreneurs have to have is usually facing adversity and being able to overcome adversity, because usually there's a lot of problems that might come our way. So one thing I'm wondering on your side is maybe it could be something on, say, like the career side, or it could have been like when you're an engineer now. But do you mind sharing a story with us about kind of some adversity that you faced and sort of the steps that you took to overcome it, and maybe some learning lessons from that specific example?
Yeah, there's probably been lots of many points of adversity along the way. one of the biggest ones was the transition from engineering into this. You know, like I said a little bit earlier, was just, I feel like the general lack of support that I had from a personal side of making the transition, you know, for my family and for my current relationship at the time. People who I would say meant a lot in my decision making were not all the way in for supporting the way I thought they would be. That's tough then to kind of overcome that if you don't have anyone kind of supporting you to kind of get there. The way I got over that was basically ultimately just saying, hey, you know, seeing the numbers of the growth, trusting in my partners too, and saying that this is going to work. I think it's taking a leap, and also partly came with my age too. I would say is, you know, I looked at it like, I would have been roughly about 27, 26, I guess, and looking at like, hey, this is kind of what I felt like my last shot to some degree, which is probably ridiculous because it wasn't, or it isn't, but it was like, hey, this is my last shot to like make something happen, because after that, like, maybe I want kids, or I want to settle down in some way, and I'm like, if this doesn't work, then maybe I can go back to like a regular, just kind of like engineering role. And so I think that motivation also too just made me like really grind to make this one work as much as possible. You know, in terms of like setbacks along the way once you start this business, I mean, you get a ton, and a lot are just out of your control. But then you also get like a ton of highs. I would say the biggest thing about entrepreneurship is you see like incredible highs and you see incredible lows. And like from like point where like, I'm going to lose all the money I have here now, or I'm going to get in a lot of trouble for this. And then you also, the next day, you're like, okay, yeah, like, wow, this is, you know, we're in the millions now. This is great. And so you kind of eventually, I feel like at one point you just hit the middle, and like nothing really phases you. You're just kind of like, yeah, we'll get through it at some point. I don't know. There's so many cases of hardship that we had to go through. I would say it's really hard to pinpoint one. But the overall focus of, you're going to get through this and you're just going to work as hard as you can to get through this, has held successful for us almost every single time to this point, that I have full faith now in where we're going to go.
Yeah, I feel like kind of it's really nice that you share that, and especially on like the family side, and kind of like what you probably thought would be like your support network too, to some extent, because I think if you are going to make like a really, really large transition, say going from even just like toying with your ideas, but like really going for it, like, you know, it's really nice to have kind of like our support system and our network sort of like backing us on that. And like, I think it's admirable that essentially, you know, you were able to basically go with your gut feeling, even though at the time maybe you thought it's your last chance. Me telling you right now, I know you, I don't think it's going to be your last chance, even if, say, like, you know, you guys make like a successful exit, or like whatever it comes with like your current venture. Like, I think, you know, probably 10 or 15 years from now, you and I will be catching up again, and you'll probably, just one sec. Okay, your video is still recorded. Yeah, like you'll probably still be, you know, working on something at that point in time too. What I wanted to ask you actually was on the entrepreneurial side of things, Geoff. You were talking about basically having like a balance between your emotions. How do you find that you're like successfully able to like balance your emotions as an entrepreneur?
Well, it wasn't easy. I think for the longest, I would say like a good chunk of end of 2019, early 2020, I felt like I was probably depressed to some degree. You know, you're taking massive like financial leaps, like money that you probably didn't think you were going to part with, you're starting to part with, and you're like, okay, there goes all of my net worth. You know, you're maybe asking for people for favors, really favors that you're uncomfortable asking, and just putting you in a weird position, and you don't really have anything to show them. It's kind of just blind faith, and you're like, hopefully you believe in me too. So I would say, like, to be honest with you, I was in probably a bit of a dark place for a little bit of time, and I'm sure it affected multiple relationships that I had. And so that would just be like a thing I would say too, for just like really true on like going and building companies. I think that's a pretty common trait for most people. You know, I know people who are also in positions where the point where like they sleep for like 2 hours a day, who are building similar companies, and it's to the point where like they get thrown in the hospital just because like they're just going way too hard, but they're just so focused on it. It's not very glamorous, I don't think. But the balance on like how I was able to balance it was ultimately, I think, I would say in the first 6 months or the first year, it's really hard to do that. It's there's gonna be so many things, so many sacrifices, so many leaps of faith, at least in how aggressive our growth has been to get to where you need to be. But now we're at a point where like we're relatively stable. I would say that it's not going to all sink the next day, so that like peace of mind is there. But then also now I've seen a lot of the issues that I thought could have sunk us have not done that. So you just kind of being like, oh, I've seen this before, we'll get through it, it'll be fine. And then you kind of get the time to be like, it's not as such an urgent matter. You can take that time to get back into physical fitness, which I found was huge for balancing mental health. You can get back into having a bit of a relationship with friends too, which is also a big one as well. So those things really helped, I would say.
I think, yeah. Also, it seems like you were saying earlier that like self-discipline is a big thing for you now, and you're able to grind all the time and work now just 6 days a week, not 7 days, all 11, 12 hours, which is pretty insane. You got to have a lot of self-discipline to do that. And I'm wondering, is that something that you had before this, or is that a personality trait that got born out of you because this is what the business needed? And say if somebody doesn't have good self-discipline right now, what is a way that you think a person can kind of cultivate that and bring that into their life in order to accomplish their goals?
I think if the goal is probably big enough, you're going to learn that you will have self-discipline for that goal, probably. If you want something bad enough, I think most people I've seen time and time again. Dave's a great example from what I know Dave. Like, if he was seeing what he wanted to do, and like the growth that he had academically too, put your mind enough to it that you're gonna have the discipline, I would say, to get there. And if it's not something you want bad enough, I think people just don't have that discipline, unfortunately. But there are things that can definitely help. I think, honestly, in all reality, probably COVID helped a little bit. The fact that you can't do a whole bunch, so you end up just working through it, helped a little bit. But in terms of like skills that you can use for self-discipline, again, a team motivation is huge. That's why I would always say, if you're going to start something, you probably try to do it with a team, because doing it by yourself and being like the only one motivating yourself too. We saw how hard it was just with 2 other partners. Doing it by yourself without the other support network, I can't imagine how you would do it. Just from like a mental health standpoint too. But there are tools out there. Having agendas, I think, definitely really help. Reminding yourself of eventually why you're doing it for can be very important, because it's easy to get lost in the day-to-day of what needs to get done, and eventually like, why am I doing this? Like, what's the point of doing this is a big motivator too. And also the motivator of like, I just don't want to go back to what I was doing before, so I just want me to make this work. And I think with that amount of motivation, it's good. And then when you see the benefits along the way, like, they don't come every day, but maybe every few weeks, or even once a month, every few months, that kind of like acts as like this kind of like another boost of like, okay, yeah, we're on the right path, this is gonna happen, this is gonna work. And like, now I don't feel like I have the urgency to like launch things like we felt like before. Before, it was like, we need to get this up today, it needs to get on like live today. And now it's like, we've got a few projects that we're working on, but I'm like, yeah, it'll get there. Maybe, planning is for Q4 of like launch, but we don't need it up today. And that's a nice thing to be in the position for.
Yeah. I would say too, like a couple things that I was thinking about then too, like, obviously thanks for the shout out, Geoff. I appreciate that. And, even from my end too, I know, like, knowing Geoff, definitely like very disciplined and like been able to have a strong focus and kind of achieve what he wants to achieve. One thing, a couple things I saw in there. So basically, like, the team side, like having this idea of having like people around you help you keep yourself like disciplined and as well motivated is key, because like us as people, it can be really hard to basically just stay like self-motivated all the time. Even like the most personally self-motivated people, it can be hard to be self-motivated all the time. One thing I kind of like too that you were mentioning is that like a little bit on the self-gratitude side of things, like maybe once a month you were saying, or once every couple months, like you have the opportunity to sort of like look and be like appreciative for what's going on at that particular point in time. So talking more on like the team side of things, for say like students that are currently in uni or people like maybe earlier in their career right now, what would be like some benefits or like some skills that they can pick up from say like team dynamics that could help them like, grow in their career or even grow personally, you think?
I think probably the ability to probably let go of tasks and delegate is maybe, I would say, probably one of the biggest things that I would say any entrepreneur will probably tell you, and was probably one of the most pivotal things in being able to like grow their business. And I think that skill is, you can take that skill, I think, anywhere, but without the ability to, and I know it's really hard, especially if you're coming from like I would say an engineering background, where it's like, I think a lot of engineers have the trait of like, I'm going to do this myself, I'm just going to like sit down and power through it. A lot of times that's actually like the wrong thing to do, and just delegating and just really understanding what's your time worth, and being comfortable with saying someone else is going to be able to get this done is probably one of the most important traits. I guess you'd have to pair that with negotiation. The ability to, like, ultimately I look back and like, all the technical things we learned while I was in school are ultimately like not what has gotten me to the point that I'm at now. And that's something I kind of knew, but it's different when you've gone through it. It's really, I'd say, the people skills, and kind of like the discipline and time management that you can do yourself. Something's so much easier if you know the right person and you're able to negotiate and like kind of delegate and, I'd say, win them over almost, and act as like a friend, than trying to be like, I'm going to learn the skill myself and then I'm going to do it, because you're not really ever going to grow that way. It's going to be too hard. And so that's one of the big things I've always focused on, is like now it's like growing this circle. So, whether it be trying to learn YouTube, I'm going to people who have experienced a very aggressive and amazing growth on YouTube, to be like, okay, if I want to launch a brand via YouTube, that's how I'm going to go to them. I'm not going to try to learn it myself, and honestly, I'm going to try to learn 5% maybe myself, and then delegate the rest. That would probably be the best skills, I would say.
Yeah, so that's interesting. The people skills and the negotiating skills have become the most valuable for you, and in order to utilize those, you definitely, I think, you have to have a really strong network. And when you're younger, maybe you don't have that strong of a network yet. What do you feel are some things you can do while you're still in school or just outside of school to really make those extremely useful connections and lay the foundation for a good network that you can leverage in the future? Or just, if you don't have one, like, how can you still just negotiate and access people to have a mutually beneficial relationship? What are some strategies that you think are good when you're in that position?
Yeah, I mean, one of the nice things about being in school is like, there's so many groups and there's so many ways to do, like, get cross involved in different departments. When I was in school, it was in engineering. I was like, I think like the VP of communications for like the real estate team, and like everyone else in that was in business school. I ended up meeting a lot of people who I still talk to today. People who, if like I have a real estate question, I'm going to them, and if they have an e-commerce question, they're coming to me about it. Because it's just, school is really good. Is really good for actually just, like, I'd say, like, promoting that growth. General, it's curiosity is great for me. Like, the travel aspect to me might sound a little cliche, but the travel aspect is something that I'd say really helped with my personal growth. So many things that we did in China, just by chance or being curious, like, opened so many doors down the road to where we are now. By just taking that extra step, or deciding to go to that show, or staying an extra hour, those are really big. Ultimately, I think, those are the best things you can probably do in school. Once you graduate, you don't get as many of those opportunities. So for people who have graduated, I'd say usually the best option is trying to find, like, really understand, first of all, where you are and like what field you want to grow in, and then try to find the mastermind groups around that. Those have proven very pivotal, I think, for us. You end up meeting so many cool people. We met people. I'm friends with a guy now who's best friends with Richard Branson. I'm friends with a guy who's like, met with George Bush kind of thing. It's like, and it's just kind of like those degrees of connections are very interesting. And so that would be the biggest thing. And not being afraid to like step out is really hard. I think a lot of people in school are very like, they're a little nervous to jump out and ask for help or kind of step up and try to be a little more extroverted. But most people, I would say, are like very in the same boat, and they don't really want to ask that question. But they want someone to. So, and you probably hear it 1,000 times before, but it's because it's true. And the person who does ask that question ends up getting people gravitating towards them, and you can form a good network that way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Geoff, like, a couple of the things in there too, like curiosity, right? Like, similar to you, I've also spent some time in China, and I think it's just like that mentality you just put forward to of say like trying to even just be like a little bit more extroverted, even if we're not super extroverted by nature. Like, you never know where these opportunities lead you. And I think like for myself, I probably have thought something similar beforehand, what I thought would like maybe not be like a consequential thing. Like, I don't know, for example, 3 years back I did Toastmasters for a little bit when I was in my master's school, and then actually the confidence I got through the public speaking and like presenting in front of other people helped a lot when I went and did like an internship, and then when I went to China and started doing group presentations. So it's like, even I'll just kind of share this on my side for the audience too, is like, even if we don't have the opportunity or like we don't think it's going to be like a good fit for us to go try to do something, I think we should just try it and do it at least like 1 or 2 times, because even if you've tried it and you don't like it, like you can always go back and not do it. Like, yeah. But at least you've given it an effort, and maybe you learn somebody or you meet somebody new that can point you in another direction, something else you like too. So the last question I'm going to ask you, and I think it's like right nicely on this topic of like trying something that's like a little bit unique and outside the bubble, is I actually know from somebody that was an engineer at the company at the time how you got your first job. So I heard that essentially, I mean, most people like, they apply online or maybe they go for like a referral or something like that. I heard that like you had basically like made a really nice resume and you like printed it out and you actually like hand delivered it to this company. So I'm curious, was this your approach when you were looking for your job? And I know that this engineer, it stuck out in his mind and he was really impressed with like this mechanism too.
Yeah, well, I think that did happen. But yeah, I don't know. I guess at that point, I felt like that personal aspect was important. I was a little confused, first of all, honestly, how to apply to the company a little bit. But the other one was I felt that it was, just doing something online, and I can attest to this now. If I do a job posting, it can be in like 2 days, 3 days. I have like 500 applicants. Like, in all honesty, like I don't have the time to go through these resumes, nor do I want to go through all these resumes. And I'm sure everyone's very qualified and a great person, but like there's got to be something that's gonna set you out. There may be someone way better in that 500 resumes, but the person who came to me and talked to me is gonna stick in my mind. And that's the thing, is like relationships are so key, and the people who can build the relationships the best, I think, ultimately are the people who succeed really well. Genuine relationships. So all you really need to know is the first step. I think, what is the next step, or the first step that we need to go. The first step, if you execute it well, is going to kind of show you where the next step is, and that's going to grow. And then before you know it, if you're working with a few people, they're all going to be doing the same concepts, and then your team's going to grow, and your idea is going to grow. And the rest is kind of history, I guess.
Yeah, I can completely agree with that, man. And I think like that idea of just like growth and like basically being able to go outside your comfort zone and like make a lasting impression. I mean, like this guy, I don't think he actually like knew you personally, and like he had already moved past that company, but like I think I just remember we were volunteering together and I mentioned your name, and it was like it kind of stuck out in his head. So, and that was probably like 2.5 years after that specific event. So, looking at like the first impression, that first impression is still very strong in his mind afterwards.
That's great.
So yeah, Geoff,
I think I just
once again, really.
But I don't know for sure.
Yeah?
Yeah, so I don't know his name.
It's all good. I'll share it with you. I'll share it with you after the after the chat right now.
Okay.
But yeah, Geoff, I wanted to thank you again. Like, I think there's a lot of really good wisdom in here, and yeah, we're really grateful you wanted to come on today too. So thanks for being here.